Hello and welcome to Planning the Next Project Year, a webinar for VISTA sponsors and leaders. As a VISTA project director or staff member overseeing the project, you are responsible for managing and supporting a project's transition from one year to the next. As a VISTA leader, you may be asked to support project continuation by documenting your progress, offering ideas, and more. So today's webinar will focus on ways that you can prepare for the transition from one project year to the next, such as developing and implementing a project continuation plan. My name is Eric Powell, and I'm a training specialist with the VISTA program at AmeriCorps headquarters in Washington, D.C. My role focuses on training VISTA project directors and supervisors, and today I'll be hosting the webinar as well as providing some insight on the topic. I'm pleased to introduce you to our main presenter, Kathy Lenz with Development Plus Incorporated. Kathy has been working with AmeriCorps sites for over 26 years. She has also acted as a consultant for various federal agencies, specifically working on health and human services with U.S. nonprofit partners that address the needs of our community's most vulnerable sectors. She previously served as a trainer for Peace Corps in Guatemala and currently serves as a site supervisor at an AmeriCorps Vista project. Kathy also comes with a knowledge of and experience in developing and implementing plans, including helping organizations be resilient and thrive. And her tenure being connected to AmeriCorps really strengthens her relevant examples. Kathy, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Eric. I'm looking forward to sharing some of my experiences around project continuation. But to be truthful, I'm especially looking forward to hearing from you, our sponsors and leaders, during our engagement activities. Let's explore what I hope we'll get out of our time together. We'll start by describing the concept of continuation with the VISTA project and what that means. Next, we'll identify specific aspects of VISTA projects that appear in each year of the VISTA project lifecycle. Then, we'll pinpoint ways to develop a plan for continuing into the new project year. And lastly, we'll explore ideas on how to implement project continuation. Before we do anything else, it's important for us to start by describing project continuation, since you may or may not be familiar with that term, and in particular, how does that actually apply to VISTA projects and the work that you do. When we talk about VISTA project continuation, it refers to the process of renewing a project for an additional year. In this webinar, we'll be discussing more about the overall project life cycle, which can include multiple years, as well as how you can manage the transition from one project year to the next. In thinking about project continuation and moving from one project year to the next, I want to begin with somewhat of a short scenario. Let's say, for example, that you are in the first year of your project and you're starting to prepare for the second year. In this case, the project has been around for some time. The project team has been working on reviewing, updating, developing some processes as it gets near the end of its first year. A successful transition between project years will mean working with your VISTA members who are exiting their service. That's going to mean gathering information on what the team has learned over the previous year, and then thinking about how to best use that information. Having a plan that strategically uses this information will help the new project year launch smoothly. It also will mean working with your new team members who are just getting started. That means transferring information and knowledge to them about what has happened so far, and brainstorming with them about what's next for the upcoming year. It's also a great chance to bring their unique skills and experiences to the project, which then will create even new opportunities. And if your project doesn't yet have a VISTA member on board or won't have any on board as it prepares for the next year, this is the time for project directors to gather the information they have about project improvements and adjustments so they can plan for the very next year.
And while it may be obvious to some, it may not be so clear to others just why project continuation is so important. Kathy, I'm sure based on your experience, you can probably provide some additional insight. But I do want to very quickly initially boil it down to the fact that you need to assess the project's progress towards its goals to determine what to adjust in the near and future term.
I agree with that, Eric. And as I said earlier, many VISTA project sites are finishing a year with one team of members and starting again with a new team. Because of that, effective project continuation shares similarities with short-term project sustainable efforts, which we'll briefly touch on in a moment. Regular assessments of the project's work can help you make real-time adjustments to your plans. However, the end of each project year serves as a pivot point between which what has been and what's coming next. Pausing at this moment really helps leadership and other stakeholders reflect on the past year of work and any changes that may have been made since the project's inception. This is also the time to re-examine the budget for the remainder of the project, the timeline for completion, and your overall project plan to make sure they can still support your project's work. Effective project continuation is a stepping stone to overall sustainability. Let's briefly highlight some similarities and then what makes them different. Both sustainability and project continuation are similar in that they involve building off of previous work and keeping important items going. To be successful, both sustainability and project continuation efforts require an organization to operate with a clearly defined mission, good financial health, and resilience. Project stakeholders need to have a strong understanding of the project's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities for growth during periods of transition.
However, let me highlight that the difference is that sustain can mean to maintain, support, uphold, or endure. Nonprofit sustainability refers to a nonprofit organization's operational and financial capacity to successfully provide services and achieve its mission over the long term. In the context of VISTA, sustainability usually refers to an organization's ability to maintain the capacity that a VISTA project built once the organization no longer has access to VISTA resources.
VISTA project continuation only involves transitioning between separate years of the project. It's not focused on long-term end-of-the-year project activities. The focus is on assessing your organization's incremental year-by-year progress and adjusting plans as you get ready to move into the next project year. Having a plan for project continuation is beneficial for many reasons and ways. Year-long plans provide incremental roadmaps for the project. It includes stakeholder responsibilities, project risks, and milestones, and lastly, creates accountability for project progress. Overall, having a solid plan for each year of the project can be a huge morale boost for project staff and stakeholders. It minimizes stress and uncertainty because, frankly, not knowing what to do first or next can quickly overwhelm people. In doing this, it can also give individuals something to look forward to as they can see the plan and where the project is headed. Additionally, plans inspire confidence. You don't have to wonder if the project is keeping pace with the deadline. Your teammates don't have to guess what they should tackle next. Community leaders and program participants don't have to worry about whether or not you've got a strategy for delivering what they need. Plans can also increase engagement among project staff and stakeholders. Getting a chance to provide input into what worked and what didn't, with ideas about how to make it better, increases ownership in a project. And if you have a comprehensive visual like a logic model, or if you can develop one, it helps everyone recognize at a glance how we plan to get from point A to point Z.
Kathy, that was a great overview of project continuation. And I'll say that I know many people do not like surprises, whether they're good or bad. So developing plans to continue into the next year of the project can really help minimize surprises so that sponsors and leaders are always aware of progress and assessing next steps. So let's hear from you now about how you are currently implementing project continuation. We'll use the chat panel for this activity, And again, please be sure you're sending your message to everyone. We're asking you to think back to successful project continuation activities, and really, any time that you continue something. They typically require transferring knowledge, gathering information, and managing your project's transition from one year to the next. Whether you have already been involved in your project's continuation or not, we want you to answer the question, what are you currently doing to transfer knowledge, gather information, and or manage your project's transition from one year to the next? In other words, what specific activities are you doing to help your project move into the next project year? We'll give you about 30 seconds to go ahead and process your answer and type it in the chat, and then we'll share some results. I'm seeing some really good responses coming in. I know this is a question that involves some thinking, so it's okay if you don't have an answer right this second. But some of the answers I'm seeing, Kathy, are phenomenal. One-on-one trainings, which I think is applicable to training staff, training community members on what their project is doing so that they can help continue the project into its next year. I'm seeing internal evaluations of staff and of VISTA members to record not just what they think of the project, but also to record their progress and what they've achieved so that you as the project director and the leader understand what's been accomplished and can use that as you segue into planning for the next year. Keeping lots of detailed notes and data, meeting weekly. I see a lot of comments around meeting weekly and connecting with people, really setting up that dedicated time to talk about what's happened and what's to come. So Kathy, as you see all these, and I see there's more coming in, what do you make of these comments?
Oh, there's some really big wins in here because what so many of them are pointing to is that documentation, giving people great ideas of how do we document our process? What do we have to do systematically with those one-on-one meetings? Those small steps that when we do them consistently create big wins for us on the other side. I just want to thank everybody for sharing your thoughts. Let's think about your answers as we get into more detail about the project continuation planning. To ground us a bit more in the process of project continuation planning, it's important that we start by briefly explaining the typical VISTA project lifecycle, and then note how yearly project planning fits into it. A quick way to show yearly planning project activities is by using this high-level overview of a typical VISTA project lifecycle. It shows what project directors of sponsoring organizations do throughout various phases of the VISTA project. The life cycle begins with the start of the VISTA project when staff submit a concept paper and project application to AmeriCorps, which includes details about the project's purpose and goals. The life cycle ends with the official completion of the VISTA project and VISTA resources. In the middle, however, are various activities, some of which are only completed once, like signing the memorandum of agreement with AmeriCorps, and some that are repeated each year or multiple times each year, like submitting VISTA assignment descriptions, recruiting applicants, and providing member supervision and support. One thing to keep in mind is that the VISTA members' one-year term of service will rarely line up exactly with 1 year of the project. That is an important element to consider when planning for continuation.
I'll say that you are not expected to memorize this information. However, I do encourage you to have it handy and reference it, or some version of it, and do this regularly because it'll really help remind you of important tasks as you assess this year's project progress and you start to develop a plan for next year.
Let me give you an example from my own work. I am a site supervisor under NeighborWorks America. As a supervisor, I manage the overall operational plan for our nonprofit's current projects, while simultaneously managing our VISTA members' capacity building activities. These activities include partnership building with local employers, collecting data about places in our community for new housing developments, and interviewing governmental officials and residents about opportunities and challenges for these developments. Once my project's intermediary accepted my application to be a site, I began to follow the life cycle. First, I started with submitting our volunteer assignment descriptions. Then we set our agency up in e-grants with VADs and service opportunity listings to advertise our open positions. And then we were off to do the recruitment of applicants and establish our on-site orientation and training plan. When we had our applicants in hand, we worked with our project director and her VISTA leader to get our potential members into the system and approved. Then onboarded to our agency as we provided member support and continued to recruit applicants. As supervisors, each of us then reviews our plans for operations and capacity building while submitting our required reports. And the process continues, sometimes in a linear fashion, sometimes with multiple things happening at once, and sometimes slightly in a different order than really what I was envisioning. Keeping
And that happens, Kathy. I totally get it. So happens to all of us. But I do want to ask you to keep that quick example that Kathy just shared in mind, because one critical element of planning for the next year is really reflecting where your project is in its life cycle, and then specifically what you can do to best support your project as it transitions from one year to the next.
In addition to this general process, each of us will also have the specific components of our project program goals to address. For my agency, these are economic development and affordable housing. Your goals may be different. In this work, we have the opportunity and the responsibility to create the continuation plan we want. And as Eric just noted, this requires time for intentional reflection as we complete each of these tasks. I remember the very first year that I had to get everything ready and started to host a VISTA member. It was a mad scramble. You don't always get a lot of notice as the project is a go, so you have to move quickly and put it together. Once the rush was done, I took time to reflect on what I liked about the finished items and what I knew I wanted to do differently in the next round. Keeping notes from that phase then helped me actually prepare the materials I needed for the next round. This can be the basis for your continuation plan. In this conversation, we are talking about the project continuation planning and what it's like for us as project directors, supervisors, and VISTA leaders. But what about the members? As you know, members are an integral part of the VISTA project lifecycle, which is an entire 3 to 5 year duration of the VISTA project. Within that life cycle, there's an annual cycle of actions that may, but likely will not align exactly with a member's 1 year life cycle of service. However, the project life cycle and the member life cycle do coexist and support each other.
And one quick note is that we will not be discussing the member lifecycle in this webinar, since today's webinar focuses on 1 year of the project lifecycle. However, as Kathy mentioned, it really can be to your benefit to dedicate time to learn about the typical member lifecycle, really to better understand common member attitudes and abilities at different points of the service, and how that impacts your project's work and your continuation.
More specifically, the progress your members make on their VISTA assignment descriptions should have a direct impact on the project's overall progress towards its goals and the plans for the next year. I suggest that you have conversations with members and their supervisors to discuss the information you need to factor in so that you can think about what your project continuation plans should look like. Our description of the project continuation and identification of yearly VISTA project activities, from VISTA members to VISTA leaders to supervisors to project directors and project stakeholders, all fits into planning for project continuation. So let's explore ways you can begin to develop a plan and discuss what you need to consider when planning. As you begin the transition from 1 year to the next, one of the first things to do is to set aside time to reflect on and assess the different aspects of the most recent project year. Explore all the aspects of the year. Take the time to figure out the individual components that made your activities work or not work. More importantly, ask why. If it worked, why? If it didn't work, why? That question can be one of the most important parts of your plan. When it's time to reflect on project elements, I suggest that you begin by focusing on 4 specific elements: recruitment, onboarding, supervision, and retention. There are other project elements to consider, but these elements encompass the biggest buckets of the work that's related to your VISTA members and the overall project. It'll get you started working towards project continuation planning.
So with that context in mind, you'll see a poll appear on your screen in just a moment. And the question we want you to answer is, which of these 4 elements do you feel that your project needs to enhance most as you plan for its next year? And again, as Kathy mentioned, recruitment, onboarding, supervision, retention. You can only select one. Which one, at least in the current moment of your project, what you know about your project so far, do you feel your project most needs to enhance as you plan for the project next year? It'll be a fairly quick poll. I see a lot of responses coming in, so thank you for answering. And again, all you have to do is click on an option and click submit. If you don't see the poll or can't access the poll, you can certainly type your answer in the chat. But I think most people are able to access it. So we'll give you another 10 seconds or so as we get close to seeing the results. Again, which of these 4 elements do you feel your project most needs to enhance as you plan for the next year? So 5 more seconds. I'm not going to do an official countdown, but we'll pretend there's fireworks at the end. Okay, we'll close the poll now, and I'll briefly read off the results. So of the respondents, 42% feel like recruitment is the top thing to enhance, 23% onboarding and getting VISTA members started off to a good year of service, 19% supervision and effectively supervising and managing members, and then 17% of respondents retention and keeping volunteers, keeping VISTA members with their project. These results are fascinating, and I really appreciate this, so thank you very much for that. But we're not done with this concept yet. So keep these project elements in mind as we move to one more activity related to the same topic. So keeping these 4 elements in mind, we're going to transition to a chat question to enable you to engage with and learn from other project directors and leaders in this webinar. In the chat, we want you to expand on the question, what is one lesson that you've learned about recruitment, onboarding, supervision, or retention that you plan to use in the next project year? So you can think about the poll that we just did about which one you need to enhance, and then think about a lesson you've learned and how you plan to implement that into the next year of your project. We do ask you to be as specific as possible because your answer may help other attendees in the webinar be able to adapt it and use in their project. But again, we'll play some music while you think about and record your response. Thank you in advance. Great responses coming in. And again, I know you might be thinking about your response, so feel free. There's no urgency to respond, but I'll read off a couple of them. I saw initially David commented that housing is a lesson learned, and I think that ties in with recruitment, that housing is hard to find, it can be difficult to find, and it makes it more difficult, especially when you're trying to recruit a VISTA member who may not live in the area. Kim mentions retention. A lesson they learned is that sometimes you can have the best plans and you also have to, as Kathy has talked about, you also have to plan for the unexpected and knowing that sometimes things just come up and you still want to do as best you can to retain and keep your VISTA members. And then I saw Megan talked about onboarding, how it's so critical to have an onboarding procedure. and one that's rigid enough that you can replicate it and use it in each year of your project, but also one that's flexible enough that you can adapt it because different members might need different onboarding elements. It's a customized but a structured plan. Kathy, I know I see a lot more responses coming in, and I know you have a lot of experience with all four of these elements. I'll turn it to you to see what thoughts are coming to your mind.
Oh, there's some really interesting things coming in right now. So one of them that I caught in there that talked about some of the intermediaries were talking about some of the training that they do specifically around documentation. So they prepare all of their sites, helping people work through and have a plan for what if a personal issues come up and a member leaves their site. What do you have to put in place that you aren't left stranded at that particular moment? So some of those strategies that they're looking at there, how do they handle the hybrid work? What are the guidelines and rules of how they manage that? How do they best match up people? And I did see that there were several people who talked about housing is a way bigger issue than I had realized before. So thinking about strategies that really help us with that side of it as we go forward. I want to thank everybody for sharing because there's just really brilliant things here for us to take a look at and start to position a little bit more around. Let's focus on assessing improvements. As you reflect on program elements in the past year's progress, you'll explore how to assess improvements and modifications to your project continuation plan going from year to year. Let's start with conducting exit interviews with your outgoing VISTA members. This will help you gather information about how you can strengthen the project as a sponsor or a leader, and how supervisors can really support the project much more effectively. For example, you may ask members open-ended questions like, what was your most memorable experience? What do you wish you had known back when you started that you know now? What should the project stop doing, start doing, and keep doing?
So next, I'll mention use the project progress report as a tool for reflecting on your project's successes, support needs, and challenges. It can also be a critical tool to point to possible solutions to those challenges if you really take a moment to expand on what you've already achieved in your report. This step will allow you to get additional feedback on possible project improvements from your portfolio manager as well. And I'll give you a quick example. It helps to review what we promised to accomplish in the original plan, such as how many volunteers did we say we would engage? Are we on target? If not, why not? And if we're doing better than expected, why? What can we do to replicate this in the future? And what's left for us to do in the next project year?
The third component examines our performance. Regularly review the project goals and objectives and use them to measure the project's performance. You can then make adjustments based on yearly or quarterly performance to ensure the project is on track to achieve its goals. For example, I really encourage our team members to reflect on their events and milestones for the project and consider what worked about what we just did. How can I repeat that? What didn't work and why? What could we try next time to improve our efforts? Lastly, we connect with community members who are involved in the project and solicit their feedback on the project's progress. Hearing different perspectives may help you identify areas for improvement that you wouldn't have noted otherwise. For example, in our area, we would be working with county and city administrators on housing issues, identifying lots for future construction efforts, or creating shared equity housing options such as land trusts or restricted deeds in order to maintain affordability for homes in our area. Ultimately, much of the data you need to develop for your plan is already available to you. You just need to gather it from people and systems, review and understand it, and turn it into actionable steps you put into your continuation plan. A crucial part of project continuation planning is anticipating and factoring in change. Some potential changes you may want to account for include VISTA members ending their service early, which some of our people have already mentioned. They ended as scheduled or they terminated early. Project staff members leaving for any reason, as well as changes in the organization related to its focus and goals. For example, Identifying staff members who can take over your VISTA project if the project supervisor is no longer available. That can really help avoid confusion and ensure the project can move forward relatively smoothly. To be successful in this situation, you would also need to have thoughtful documentation of project activities and organization-wide understanding of the VISTA project's goals. You can implement these practices early in the project life cycle and include them in your project continuation plan to make life easier if changes do occur during the project year. When the project experiences changes, consider how you and other project stakeholders responded or perhaps still need to respond. Did you address the change effectively? What might you do differently in the future? And what activities can you replicate in future years? After speaking of changes, there are some changes you can anticipate, but there are also those that are completely unexpected situations. Events such as budget cuts, project freezes, cyber attacks, data breaches, or natural disasters can disrupt our best laid plans for AmeriCorps Vista projects, including plans for continuation. I don't know anybody who wants these things to happen, but they do. Sometimes on a national level, sometimes on a regional or local level, sometimes on an organizational or project level. Here's the thing. The day to start discussing how we will handle something like a project freeze is not the day it goes into effect. We will want to already have a continuation plan in place. Project continuation planning will ensure that any current or future activities can keep using the momentum the organization had before the disruption. One of the best ways to plan for the unexpected and the expected is to document the knowledge that the project has discovered and outline how we can transfer it so we can strive to make the project even better during the next year. Knowledge transfer is a holistic approach that ensures everyone is up to speed on project developments. It might involve reviewing project plans, previous VISTA reports, stakeholder feedback, process documentation, and lessons learned. So, how does this connect to project continuation? Transferring knowledge helps others continue the important work of the project. Because of this, projects need to have well-documented processes and procedures in place that project staff regularly review and update. Here are some considerations you can make surrounding knowledge transfer. Create comprehensive documentation or artifacts for every project year and encourage members to do the same. I actually noted in the chat that people are already starting to talk about some of this. The goal for your documentation is to be accessible, structured, and easy to understand for the next VISTA member or staff member. For example, members, supervisors, and project directors can all contribute to a physical or electronic legacy binder beginning at the start of the service year to give the next VISTA member, supervisor, and project director context for their activities and their goals. Encourage supervisors to act as a mentor and coach to their members. Regular check-ins between supervisors and members can facilitate knowledge transfer, especially the transfer of tacit knowledge that may not be easy to document. In many ways, VISTA leaders can also act as coaches as they guide and support a member through their year of service. Supervisors should pass on information about organizational culture, issues that the member needs to consider over the course of their service, and skill development opportunities. If VISTA members serving with the same project have overlapping terms of service, the outgoing member would be ideal to help transfer that type of knowledge to the incoming members. The more support and resources the supervisor provides the member, the better the chances that the member will be motivated to help the project succeed and continue.
Kathy, I also want to add that throughout the life cycle of the project, and especially as you plan for project continuation, you must involve, incorporate, and engage stakeholders. First, get to know their connection to the project and the organization. Then take the time to meet with them to discuss the project's progress, including lessons learned, the project's strengths and challenges, as well as possible improvements. Community members definitely need to know, or staff members, either one, that they can offer their feedback and their insight in an effort to take ownership of the project activities as the project continues.
Eric, I am so glad you mentioned this part. Here's an example from my work. In our area, we work with the Latino Chamber of Commerce representative and the Welcoming New Arrivals coordinator from our school district. They help us understand where families from the local Spanish speaking community are likely to see our flyers. For us, it's Los Amigos restaurant, the local laundromats, or the churches. Their involvement adds greater credibility to our organization and encourages more participation in our programs. They also provide valuable context and information about the community. For instance, while there were more Mexican families living here in the past, we now see a growing number of Nicaraguan families and US citizens from Puerto Rico moving to the area. Each of those groups have very different experiences and views on housing, money matters, and community traditions. Since these individuals can be impacted by the work of our project, it's vital that we make intentional connections with them and listen to their stories as they help us really examine how to strengthen and continue our project story. I also want to mention that in rural Wisconsin, we have a growing Latino community, but there are very few trained housing counselors who can speak Spanish. To address this, we applied for funding to train new staff from our community and help them become certified housing counselors. We also reached out to community leaders in bilingual education from the school district, also the job training programs at the local technical college, and a representative from the Latino Chamber of Commerce. Getting these key players involved was crucial to the continuation and success of our project. But frankly, it took several meetings where we answered their questions and built trust. All of these stakeholders needed information about their roles, their points of contact, and any changes to the project. We regularly updated them on monthly meetings, personal phone calls, and emails containing project updates.
Kathy, you just mentioned a key piece of any relationship or partnership, which fully supports our discussion of project continuation and planning for the next year. You mentioned the word communication. So, can you provide any more insight into this, specifically in what ways you communicated to your stakeholders and the impact that it made?
Absolutely. Mainly, you mentioned earlier, Eric, how integral stakeholder relationships are to the project being able to keep going. So my organization kept our stakeholders updated on our project continuation plans. We, in our first year, stayed in contact with local Spanish speaking community leaders by phone and email. They organized and promoted meetings where we discussed the project. Since they supported our efforts, they invited us to join social media groups to keep up with community news and to share our own updates. We also tried to use services from the local business owners we work with. See, this is critical to us. Instead of just taking from the community, we wanted to contribute to them and help them succeed where we could.
Stakeholders are so important. So, as you think about any and all stakeholders in your VISTA project, here's another chat activity. The question is, how will you involve your project stakeholders in your continuation planning? It's intentionally a slightly broad question, but we want you to think now and even after the webinar about how you can take specific steps to interact with and involve your project stakeholders in helping you think about the project continuating, yeah, that's a word, continuing from one year to another. So let me stop talking, give you a moment to type your responses in the chat. I'm really excited at the responses I'm seeing. Organizing a board retreat, really getting the board involved in about what AmeriCorps Vista is and helping them understand the project, sharing our milestones with project stakeholders so they know what we've accomplished and where we plan to go forward, meeting our stakeholders, finding out who they are. Some projects may not even know who's find their project meaningful and is going to impact. So that's a key component. Engaging the community on what the VISTA members are doing, either via flyers, text messages, emails. I also see speaking to the community, speaking to the stakeholders about what projects they're doing and seeing if there's any alignment to connect the stakeholders with what they're doing and the VISTA project so it's all seamless. And then talking to residents, school board members, people in the community about the project and all that's happening. Kathy, these are great responses, aren't they?
Oh, these are really good ideas. The thing of it is we have now is with these ideas, we want to take them and think about like how do we actually implement that in our next year, getting ready for that transition. As we've been discussing the considerations that go into planning project continuation, we know that a plan only works if it's implemented. So let's get into how to actually implement your plans. A possible starting point for your project continuation planning is adopt, adapt, or discard lists. This can help you figure out what part of your project you need to change or remove entirely to make sure that it can achieve its goals. First, decide what you will adopt or continue from the previous project year. For example, if the project used a successful data collection system in its first year, you could adopt that system for the new year. Next, think about what you would adapt or change. If unexpected issues like departures of staff or member supervisors came up last year, review how you'll handle them and create a better plan for handling similar problems in the future. Finally, determine what you will discard or not try again. For example, if a certain project activity was too complex for a member in order that they couldn't even complete it in a single year, you may want to replace that activity in the upcoming year. This is just one recommendation, but let me offer you some steps to help you create an effective continuation plan. This is a quick glance of what some of the steps I would recommend include in your continuation plan, and I want to provide some specifics for each one. When developing and implementing a continuation plan, you must also consider one piece of that plan called a transition plan. A transition plan is a document that transfers knowledge, responsibilities, and tasks from one person or team to another. So often, when discussing handing over information and resources, the person exiting promises they've left behind a very thoroughly detailed and comprehensive plan, and yet we hear a lot of complaining from the people who receive it going, are you kidding me? Really? So we want to make sure that you have a detailed and completed transition plan in place after a member finishes their service. This really helps aid the person taking on the responsibilities to get up to speed with details, and it helps project directors and leaders more easily use the details in the transition plan to update and implement their project continuation plan. Start the continuation plan by defining what teams in which the VISTA member or staff member will have a role, noting where they fit within a wider organization. Include stakeholder names, both internal and external, and provide links to documents that state core objectives or illustrate team structures. For each team, provide a status update on the objective and the specific key contexts, deadlines, and next steps. Include any known risks or issues along with suggested solutions. This information will be valuable for continued progress. Don't forget to include relevant resources and shared folders for the project in the continuation plan. I'm going to give you an example from my site. We would detail the staff of the Home Ownership Center who are working on home buyer education and counseling. Our incoming member would be working with the HUD certified counselors and the intake coordinator. They would aim to further improve our outreach to the Spanish speaking community by establishing lunch and learn sessions with the local employers. As you continue the plan, you'll start to outline key responsibilities. List the critical tasks that the project is currently handling, including the daily duties and reoccurring deadlines. That will serve as a general scope of the role. Be sure to reference people, documents, deliverables, meetings, and events that are relevant to each responsibility. This provides an important context that will set the next person up for success whether they're another VISTA member or a community stakeholder. Also make sure that you include any training requirements and risks that you are tracking. For example, at our site, we would list some key responsibilities for the member. It's part of the VISTA assignment description that we're working from. And they might be making calls and setting up meetings with local employers, as well as working with the Latino Chamber of Commerce representative and the local Chamber of Commerce on making business connections. You will naturally list out the tasks and the activities and actions that have been completed, as well as remain incomplete. This serves to help project directors, supervisors, leaders, and even members plan for the weeks leading up to the transition. Again, an example from my site, we would list that task yet to be completed so that our members are creating, in this case, they would be creating educational and marketing materials in both English and Spanish for future lunch and learn sessions. That's the next step in the process. You've heard me use the verb document multiple times, and I've seen it come up several times in the chat. That's because documentation gives you what you need to continue processes and procedures at the project. Whether extremely complex or super simple, including step-by-step instructions, tips for troubleshooting, and references to any helpful guides or documents really help. This section is particularly important for tasks that are unique to the position or require specific knowledge. Let's think about it from the perspective of engaging a stakeholder in the process who knows nothing about what your project is doing. This is why it needs to be clear and straightforward. As a VISTA supervisor, I would work with our members to help them understand our database Counselor Max, which tracks the amount of time we spend with clients, including time spent working on marketing and outreach. There would be documentation and specific steps to guide them through it. We want to create a list of key contacts that includes internal and external stakeholders relevant to the role. I am almost certain that you've heard this tip before. You need to include names, positions, contact information, and a brief description of their relationship to your project or specific responsibilities. You may want to even include a note about the skills they bring to the project, along with the potential roles you want to assign them. This network will be essential for the successor to navigate relationships and collaborate successfully. Try to make it as detailed as necessary to help with continuation planning and knowing who can assist you. At our site where I work, we have a list of contacts that include the Chamber of Commerce within our multi-county area and major employers across various industries, among others. In the next step, you want to ensure that you list all necessary software, databases, and online tools that your successor will need access to. People may forget or overlook this step, and then it causes problems and delays in getting started. Security issues with sharing passwords and accounts and other issues that can really start to pop up. Remember to follow your organization's security policies when handling sensitive information, while you make sure the appropriate access is given to the appropriate people who need access. The real trick here is to make the system work for you. At our agency, we would include our Counselor Max database in this list of tools and ensure we created a user account for incoming members before their service began. This means that these members can access the database right away so they can start project activities sooner and keep the previous year's momentum going. And number 7, if you've been doing this work for even a short period of time, you're likely to have developed some insights, helpful hints, or shortcuts that can help the successor hit the ground running, as well as more easily implement continuation for the project. This might include information about team culture, stakeholder preferences, or tips for managing specific meeting scenarios. This personal touch can make a significant difference in helping this person settle in, which again plays a role in how that person's vested interest is and their interest level in keeping this project going and finishing the year. In our continuation plan, this section might include information about how our partners prefer to receive information. One person will respond faster if you text them. Another person will be better with information shared by email. Considering communication preferences of stakeholders is just one way to better engage them in the project's continuation and get them to feel that you are listening to them and really want them as a partner. Now, in step 8, I mentioned earlier that knowledge transfer is essential to your continuation plan. You can schedule one-on-one sessions with the successor to go through the transition plan together. And even if you're not dealing with the transition of key people, you can and should still schedule meetings with project staff and community members to explain the continuation plan to them and how everyone's collective knowledge needs to be captured to keep things going. For our particular example, we have available members, staff, and community stakeholders who would meet with a new member to explain more about the specific history and context of our work. This provides new and exciting people information about how and why the project started and why it's essential that the work continue. One final story that I'd like to share with you from my experience. During the potential 3-year period of our VISTA project, the priority area is for either safe and affordable rental housing or home ownership promotion and preservation among all our low and very low income workers, but especially among communities of color within our designated area of Wisconsin. Given high construction costs and high interest rates, as well as the low quantity and quality of housing stock in our area, our organization is reviewing other project options to meet local housing needs. Once the work of the VISTA project is completed, our site and its community partners will have the tools and sustainable systems in place to offer a more comprehensive strategy for supporting housing needs in the rural parts of Southwest Wisconsin. Community residents will lead efforts to address changes in local ordinances, support access to affordable housing, and create a safer supply of available housing stock. During the project, our organization will track the number of low and very low income families and individuals that become homeowners as a result of their participation in the program. I share this. This is literally the goal section that we put in our VADs to think about the end project goals that you'll include in your original VISTA assignment, that you included in your original VISTA assignment description. How can you use that to really plan out your continuation practices to strengthen your work and really help you keep moving towards your goals? The more you plan, implement, and review continuation efforts, the easier it will be to incrementally incorporate measures to replicate some tasks and create new tasks in the new year. As we touched on earlier, continuation is embedded in sustainable best practices. Consider the example I just shared about my own organization and the goals of what we wanted. We've embedded best practices during the project period, such as starting and charting incremental and long-term sustainability efforts early on, preparing for a journey, not a sprint. This is where a continuation comes in as you plan year by year. Keeping the approach to continuation simple because you don't need or want to overcomplicate it. Assisting staff and members proactively, getting them involved in the process. Reviewing the plan for keeping important work going and making sure to update the plan as necessary. Focusing on member activities and how they connect to the work the entire project is doing within the community. As you finish a project year, consider the big picture impact of the project. How much closer are you to achieving what you envisioned? What feedback from the community and from your VISTA members did you get that generated important adjustments on the way?
Such great information. So let's pause briefly here as we get close to the end of the webinar and assess how well you've been following along. You'll see a poll appear on your screen, and it's a very, very simple scenario. Ryan is a project director, and the VISTA project is in its 9 months into its first year of existence. Which of these steps do you think Ryan should take to plan for project continuation? Is it A, create a list of project stakeholders, B, recruit new VISTA members, C, review and update project goal, D, transfer knowledge to VISTA members? Again, you can only select one. We'll give you about a minute to respond, and then we'll finish out the rest of today's session. Give you another 10 or 12 seconds. I see a lot of people responding. Thank you in advance. So if you're wrapping up, we'll give you about 5 more seconds and then we'll close the poll and I will share the correct answer. Okay, so the correct answer is A, and I'll briefly explain why. So you definitely need to have a list of project stakeholders, as was discussed earlier, to make sure you can plan for one year to another and that the stakeholders are involved. B is a great option. You definitely want to recruit VISTA members, but that's not necessarily a critical component to continuation in the sense that VISTA members only serve for 1 year, whereas project stakeholders may be with their project and community for the long term. Many people selected option C. That is great that you may have to review and update your project goal, but sometimes the project goal doesn't change. And so it's kind of a tricky situation where you definitely want to review the project goal to make sure that you're on track, but you may not always need to update it. In D, it is good to share information with your VISTA members, but because VISTA members are not permanent with the project in the role as VISTA members, that's not the correct answer in this situation. So great job if you got the answer correct. Next, I'm excited to briefly have Kathy share some insight on resources that can be helpful to all of us.
Before we go, I just want to share a couple of things. First, we have an article from Impred, a website that helps organizations with staff transitions. It explains how you can draft a transition plan. So it'll go into greater detail to the things that we talked about earlier. We also have an article outlining continuous quality improvement process, which is very similar to the project continuation planning process, but helps you identify some things that you can do. And the last resource is called How to Develop a Continuous Improvement Plan. And it describes the considerations you need to make when planning and implementing strategies for improving your organization's work. As with any recommended resource, you should use it if and as appropriate and consider anything you may need to do to adapt it to your VISTA project. I just want to say it's been a pleasure to talk with you all on this topic and to have you participate. I hope you feel more prepared to work on your project continuation.
Kathy, we're so happy to have you. And I want to quickly say just a couple more resources. If you want more information on sustainability, go to the VISTA campus. I know we briefly touched on it today because today's topic was continuation, but sustainability, there's a learning path called project management, and there's some on-demand webinars that talk more in depth about sustainability. Also, one more resource on the VISTA campus, I encourage you to visit the new learning path called Understanding Organizational Change. You'll see a couple of modules in there to really help you unpack a little bit more about change management within the context of a VISTA project. Before we go, we do strongly ask if you have a minute now or afterwards to complete the session evaluation. We always review and greatly appreciate your honest feedback. So thank you in advance for completing this short 3 to 4 minute survey. And then before we go, I do want to leave you with our next webinar for sponsors and leaders is going to offer information on helping build the skills of your VISTA members. This webinar will take place on Thursday, October 10th at 3 p.m. Eastern. Registration will open soon. And I do want to thank sincerely our presenter, Kathy Linz of Development Plus Incorporated, for sharing with us today. Also, great thanks to our instructional designers, Vanessa Francis, Cameron Greenup, and Elizabeth Floyd, our senior training specialist, Andy King, and our producers, Christina Quinones, Stella, and Tessa Marshall. And again, thank you for participating and being part of AmeriCorps. Happy 30th anniversary to AmeriCorps, and next year, happy 60th anniversary to VISTA. Thank you for today's webinar. Have a great day.